Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. This is Dan Turchin, host of AI and the Future of Work, advisor at Insight Finder, the system of intelligence for IT operations, and CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. We've got two firsts this week on the podcast. This is the first time we've had a two-guest interview, so I will do my best to muzzle myself so we can get to know them. It's also the first time we've had guests who aren't native to the tech industry. Now, Rishon Blumberg and Michael Solomon are pioneers in the talent management space, having worked with A-list celebrities like Bruce Springsteen and John Mayer, and even one of my favorites, the Cherry Poppin' Daddies. I tell you, these guys forget more in an afternoon about music and entertainment than I will learn in a lifetime. Although I'm excited about today's discussion in part because my first job out of school was at Disney in Burbank, where I was a bit of a ferocious reader of the Hollywood Reporter. And I know that managing celebrities can be a very cutthroat business and one that I will never fully understand. Now, about 10 years ago, Rishon and Michael realized that tech talent can be managed like rock stars. And thus 10X Management was born. They've since recently published the popular book Game Changer, and they've been busy helping the tech community find gigs ever since then. I'd encourage you to read the book. They share some amazing stories about game changers that they've personally helped. Now, this week, we're going to continue our exploration of topics related to the future of work. We don't often spend time thinking about the freelance economy and how it's changing the composition of traditional organizations. That's going to change today. We're going to get two expert opinions on what's happening in terms of the fundamental fabric of organizations being changed and rethought in the context of freelancers and in the context of the tech talent economy. With that said, it really is my pleasure to welcome both Rishon and Michael to the podcast. Guys, thanks for joining. Let's get started. Why don't you describe your background and how'd you get into the talent management space?
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. We'd love to tag team on these podcasts and share a little bit about what we know and learn from the people who we talk to. And we're excited to sort of hear and learn about the work you're doing in the AI space. And we really got into representing talent because we both grew up on the mean streets of New York City in the 1970s, 1980s, and we had a bunch of friends whose family, parents, siblings were in the entertainment world. And so much like when you grew up listening to a record and you were interested in maybe knowing more about the players, the producer, we were seeing all of that, but from the executive side, the people working behind the scenes, whether it was the artist manager, an entertainment lawyer, somebody who worked at a record company. And so for us, when we started thinking about what we wanted to do professionally, the music business was sort of a natural entry point. And we both really were interested in being at the epicenter, which is really working with the talent directly, because that touches on all parts of, sort of the entertainment ecosystem. But what we came to realize over a number of years is it was less about necessarily just working with musicians and more about working with talent in general. And that's where the transition from exclusively working with musicians and entertainers to working with tech talent really came to be. It was around 2010 when people started to refer to tech talent as rock stars that we had a little bit of a light bulb moment, because we had been working with tech freelancers for a number of years. And it occurred to us that perhaps what we learned representing entertainment talent, we could translate to representing tech talent. And so that was really the genesis of 10X. And the goal there was to take the pain point out of finding tech talent for a company and take the pain point out of working with a company for the freelancer. So we really are we're trying to satisfy two different constituencies. And that was really the genesis. And Michael and I have known each other forever, and I'm sure he'll jump in and give us a little background on that.
Oh, we go back to third grade, and we are definitely serial entrepreneurs. One of the things that we mentioned in the book is our early entrepreneurial endeavors, some of which were not 100% kosher, like a fake ID business and throwing keg parties in high school. I think we've looked into it, and the statute of limitations is up on such crimes, so I'm not worried too much about it. But we are definitely hustlers growing up on the mean streets of New York, as Rishon said.
Perhaps not kosher, but lucrative, I assume.
It was very, especially at that age, it was great.
Now, you go through some great examples in the book. How do you identify a 10Xer? What do game changers do differently than everyone else?
I love this question. I never get tired of talking about this, and I have a feeling you are one of these people. So you may want to add a little bit to this, but the qualities that stand out for, I could talk about this for a long time, but the most outstanding qualities are lifelong learners, people who just love to soak up new things, and every time they run into something they don't know, they find out. They just figure it out. These are people who love to solve hard problems. The harder the problem, the more excited they are about working on it. These are people who are open to feedback about how they do things, because they know that that's one of the ways that they get better. And that's a really incredible quality. For the most part, and this isn't true across the board, there are people who care about mission. They don't want to just work on something and get paid, but they have a point of view about the world and a point of view about how their behavior in the world will move the world more toward the world they want to live in or further away from it. Rishon, you can jump in here anytime. And ultimately, really what makes a 10Xer a 10Xer is this is somebody who can deliver 10 times the value of their peer. And people think that's hyperbole, but we've seen this in action. I mean, we have seen, the equivalent, we've seen one person replace 10 on numerous occasions. And it's amazing, and it sounds impossible, but it's not.
Sean, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would maybe simplify it a little bit. I often say that the test of a real 10Xer is somebody who's high IQ and high EQ, where EQ is really that emotional component where you can relate to people, you can communicate effectively, you can really explain all the things that your high IQ allows you to understand. Because people who have high IQs but really low EQs, they're not typically successful at what they do. There tends to be a disconnect, or they're very isolated and really aren't able to work in team environments. And in a world, this is kind of related to what we're talking about topically with AI, in a world where we have to do more with less, you really have to be able to communicate effectively and have a brilliant mind in order to be able to achieve the economies of scale and the effectiveness that you need in order to run a company with fewer people than you had before. So to me, that's really what a 10Xer is about. It's somebody who's got a really big brain, but also a really big heart and the ability to express things and interact with people effectively.
Our mantra on this show is that for as amazing as artificial intelligence is, the A in AI really is augmented intelligence. And we talk mostly about the role of new technologies in making humans better. What are some of the things that you think are innately human traits that maybe, with regard to some of the 10Xers that you've helped, things that will never be automated?
It's not exclusively having to do with tech, but this is something we've seen both with the artists we've worked with and the exceptional tech talent we've worked with, is that there is an elegance, there is an efficiency and a beauty and an art in what they do, right? Writing code can be, you can express an action in 100 lines of code, or you can express it in 2 lines of code. You can write a book that is 1,000 pages long, or you can write a book that's 50 pages long. And just because something's bigger, longer, does not make it better. So I think really what we've seen across the different types of talent we've worked with is the people that are next level. There is a level of sophistication, but simplicity, elegance, and beauty, but not necessarily complexity. It's the ability to take something and make something beautiful out of it, even if that's a line of code, right? So, I think to me that is really what we've seen in our work is working smarter, working better, not just working harder. And I do think that that's one of the key signs of a 10Xer. And Michael was talking about sort of lifelong learning. Part of that learning and getting feedback from others about what you're doing is learning how to optimize. And optimization is something that you don't, you're not born knowing how to optimize. You learn how to optimize. Just as AI, the more data that's coming in, the more that the machine can learn, the more that they will learn. And I think humans are the same way. So 10Xers are people who maybe are just a little faster and further along that spectrum of learning and understanding in order to have sort of an elegance and an economy in the work that they do.
I would just I'd add one thought to that, which is I think machines are getting better and better at solving problems. We're still going to need humans for quite a while to understand and define the problems. It's a very human thing to see what needs to be fixed or what's wrong. A machine can do that in a very small set of parameters, but not like for the foreseeable future. I think that stays a very human set of skills. And we could go, and I don't think it's worth taking time. We could talk about all the industries where humans are going to thrive in the future, but I feel like that's widely published and not nearly as interesting.
So you guys meet so many fascinating people. Give us one example, maybe even one that's not in the book, but someone a 10X who you met recently who just blew you away.
Let's see. There are a lot of examples that come quickly to mind. He's in the book, but Daniel Lubetzky is not somebody I've known for that long, who really comes to mind. He's the founder of Kind Snacks, which he recently exited from, but built those Kind bars that you see all over the place into a multi-billion dollar business. And he did it with a lot of focus on Kind was not just a name he pulled out of a hat. It was a focus on being kind, having a kind company, having employees be kind, treating their customers with kindness. And it really it's a very different kind of 10Xer than what I think of traditionally, but he really demonstrated himself to be somebody who saw an opportunity in the world, clearly wanted to succeed and make money. He had done it before Kind as well. And then chose to do it in a way that may not have been the most expedient for making money. It might, he could have pulled a Travis, and done I'm going to have the bro culture and I'm going to beat everybody up and we're going to, throw money at problems and it's not going to matter how people feel. But this is not somebody who did it that way. This is somebody who said, I want to do it and I want to do it I want to build this company in the way I want the world to be. And, just to sort of fast forward after his experience at Kind, he's now becoming a very notable philanthropist. He's been doing that for a long time, but he's really putting his energy into that. And I think we're going to see amazing outcomes from that work as well as his for-profit work.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw in. So that was a recent example of somebody who we view as a 10Xer, but we talk about this in the book, but essentially our first exposure to a real 10Xer was when we met and were tangentially working with Bruce Springsteen and the Springsteen's management, John Lana management. That's a great example of somebody who's time tested over decades of being exponentially better than other people at what he does, whether that's songwriting, performance, speaking, just being a human out there in the world. And at the time we didn't know the concept of 10X at all, and I don't think we really realized what we were in the presence of. But it was being around that organization and Bruce's world that really spurred Michael and I to want to do what we do and working with talent. And we've kind of been chasing that high ever since, trying to get that kind of, be around those kinds of people. And it's been a really great journey. That's probably 27 some odd years ago, maybe even more, 28 years ago. So that was really our first exposure to a 10Xer.
Amazing how analogous the tech community and the entertainment community are. I see it, having lived a little bit in the entertainment community and now to be in the tech community. You guys talk about treating tech talent like rock stars. It's not just a cliche.
No, it's high performance. People have so many qualities in common with each other across fields, and we haven't worked with athletes, but I have a feeling if we were, we'd see the same there.
Like most of our 10X clients are also musicians, not professional musicians, but they have a music background. One of the things we do is have them list out hobbies as part of their profile, so we have a sense of who they are. Almost everyone has music, either an actual instrument, or they're DJing, or they play in a band, or it's amazing to see the correlation between a technical mind and a musical mind.
And you just brought up something that I want to add to the first question we were asked about what makes a 10Xer. Passion is definitely up there. And as he's pointing out, they play music, they speak multiple languages, many of them, rock climb, ski, hike, outdoor stuff. They're passionate people. They are leaning into life. They lean into their work and they lean into their play, and they really go deep. And it's a great thing to see.
It needed to be added. You're right. That creative energy, that boundless curiosity.
Yep.
So true. So true. If you don't know the founding story of Ethos Water, this guy, Peter Thumb, when you talk about Daniel and Kind Snacks, it immediately brought to mind the story of Ethos Water, which was eventually acquired by Starbucks, just a water company. It was the 800th water company. But this guy, Peter, was an inspiration and has done amazing work that reminded me of Daniel.
And Charity Water as well, if you're familiar with that.
Similar story. Yeah. Similar. Yeah. Now, Rishon, I had a chance to watch you. You did a TED Talk 4 or 5 years ago. You talked a little bit about the future of freelancing, future of organizations. Would love for you to unpack that. 5 years later, take the dust off the thesis and tell us about your thoughts on the future workplace.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually, believe it or not, it's 6 years ago. It feels like it was yesterday, but it's already 6 years ago. Yeah, I mean, for us, this idea of a 10Xer and what we do at 10X is really about an evolution in the workplace that starts with the fact that technology, and you mentioned this, I watched a couple of videos that you put together, Dan. You mentioned that almost every company now is a technology company. If they're not already a technology company, they're rapidly becoming a technology company. And the fact that technology affords all of this efficiency means that companies are doing more with less. And so the concept behind 10X was, let's help facilitate access to people who can help companies do more with less, and give companies this option of not necessarily just hiring a W-2 employee. So it's really the idea of a blended workforce and the flexibility for companies to go in either direction. And that's kind of the backdrop of the book, is about what companies need to do to be more 10X themselves, what individuals need to do to push themselves down the 10X spectrum. And I think that what I was talking about 6 years ago, it became incredibly true during the pandemic, right? Because a lot of what I talked about in 2015 is remote work and all the flexibility and all these things that companies really need to be open to in order to be able to get work with the best and brightest. In that case, I was talking about freelancers. But what I think the pandemic has opened us up to is the reality that companies need to be and should be incredibly flexible with whatever kind of work they're doing. In many cases, it's a W-2 employee that they need and should have. And in other cases, it's a 1099 employee that they should have. And that's, I think, truer today than it was 5 or 6 years ago. But the rest of what that conversation, that TED Talk was about, I think is as valid, if not more valid today. The only thing I'll add to that is that about, I want to say 4 years ago, during the early part of the Trump administration, there was a discussion around what machine learning and automation will do as far as disruption of the workplace. And we started a website called The Day After Labor, which is meant to bring together a lot of the information and the articles that are out there talking about disruption due to automation. And part of the reason we did that is they were talking about disruption. The Trump administration was saying, oh, it's 50 plus years down the road. And we were saying and thinking, like, that's ridiculous. I mean, we're seeing this already. We've seen this since the 1970s. And that's also what that talk was about. It's the shifting workplace environment. So that's kind of my thought on that talk and where we are today.
We'll link to it in the show notes as well. Now, Michael, we've talked a little bit about the talent economy from one side of the marketplace, talent finding gigs, what does it take for the gigs to find the talent? I mean, in Silicon Valley, certainly we're all familiar with Google-esque perks, but is that the secret formula, or is there something more?
Well, I think that there's two answers to the question. I think there's sort of the freelance side of this, and then there's the full-time side of it. And do you want to do you want me to focus on either one of those? Or you want to try and cover both?
Let's build off what Rishon was saying on the freelancers.
So I think the first thing is companies need to recognize that there is tremendous value in high-level freelancers, and part of what they need to figure out is when is the right time to use them, and how do we move quickly when we realize that it's the right time to use them. We can, our company can get somebody up and running with a customer who's motivated and responsive. We can get somebody up and running in 3 or 4 days. I mean, it can be incredibly quick. With one bank we worked with, it took 9 months to get through the MSA process, and they had a need. They came to us, we need to hire somebody, and it took them 9 months to get through that process. And they treated it as though they were bringing on McKinsey. Like this was a relatively small engagement of I don't know, it was $100,000 or $300,000, but this was not like a 10-year, $20 million contract. This was a simple thing. And we lost out on the revenue for that period of time. They lost out on getting help when they needed it. And there's so many, they spend so much time protecting against the legal corner cases or edge cases of things that have happened to them. Like they added, every clause in those agreements was added over some bad outcome. But what they end up with is something that's so bloated that they're actually hurting themselves more than they're protecting themselves. Yes, there will be bad outcomes. But if you do every agreement to try and mitigate every single possible bad outcome, you're not going to be able to do a lot of transactions. And that's really what I see as, especially enterprise level, but really corporate America's role needs to be to rethink how they want to approach working with freelancers, and understanding that we have people that they can bring on, who they want to bring on, that they'll never get in-house. Because these are people who they don't want a full-time job. They don't want it because they want flexibility in their life. They don't want it because they don't want to work on the same problem all the time. They love getting a new problem every 3, 6, 9 months so that they can start on something. As a matter of fact, we have people who left Google who said, I'm so much happier doing this because I work on mission critical products when I'm working with you guys. And when I was at Google for 5 years, it was a very nice place to work, but my job just kept getting smaller and smaller, not because they weren't happy, but because the problem I was working on was getting solved and solved and solved. And these are things that companies need to recognize, that it's not just about the dollars and cents. That's part of it. But this is about how can you give people satisfaction? How can you make it fast and easy? And there's a lot of work to do on that. A lot of work.
Yeah, we have a motto called rent fast, hire slow. And that's the beauty of working with freelancers, is that you theoretically should be able to onboard and offboard really quickly. It's a much lower investment of time and energy and commitment. So that's one of the things we talk to companies about all the time. It's like, yeah, you may ultimately want to hire a W-2 resource for this ultimately, but that could be a year or two down the road. And why waste all that time now when you can actually be building and iterating at the same time that you're looking for that full-time person?
Anecdotally, 30% of our business is actually putting people in roles where companies can't find the full-time person fast enough, and we're stopgapping. And part of what happens as a result of that is they can hire right because they're not desperate. When they don't do that, and we also lose a lot of business to people who say, I want to wait for my perfect forever person. First of all, nobody's staying anywhere forever anymore, so that's not really worthwhile. And second of all, that puts a lot of pressure on you to hire fast, and that's not always a good way to hire. You don't want a gun to your head when you're hiring.
3 years is the average tenure in Silicon Valley.
And it's even, if you start to break that into demographics, it gets even lower.
There's this proliferation over the last, call it 18 months, of interesting AI-driven technologies being funded specifically for to aid the HR process. So the life cycle of an employee or presumably a contractor, finding talent, screening, management, through their life cycle, coaching, etc. Talk us through how you, who run a people first talent management business, think about the role of technology. Call it, let's take a 10-year time span. What are you doing today with technology, and where do you see there might be opportunities to introduce technology into the process that you manage in the next decade?
Yeah, I mean, you sort of pointed out we are definitely a people first organization, and that's a very human based interaction. So I'm actually quite bearish on AI and how it interacts with the kind of stuff that we do. I'm not trying to roll back the hands of time or change the marching of technology and the way the world is going to go. But I do think when you're talking about people, it really needs to be very bespoke. And especially when you're really hiring for very high level, not necessarily senior level, but like high level, high performer positions, it has to be as bespoke as possible. That said, I do think that there are places where there can be a lot of efficiency and ways to expedite matters as it relates to the hiring process and the retention process and AI. As a matter of fact, one of the things that we built fairly recently, and this is not like such a huge tool or product, is basically, it's called a lifestyle calculator, and it helps a person weight what is most important in a compensation package overall, so that they can get a visualization of it and really have a sense, they can have a sense, but also their employer can have a sense of what triggers are important to them. So I do think that there are ways to convey information about who somebody is through AI, through technology. But by and large, I really feel like what has to happen more when it comes to hiring people and vetting people and finding people is that human element. So I may not be the best advocate for the right, the right kind of answer for that.
I think, like anything else, there's lots of parts of the process that really lend themselves to automation. And I also think there's parts of the process that lend themselves to technology. Reviewing candidates where you can't tell lots of things about them that would cause biases is a wonderful use of technology to get you over the hurdle, so that people don't just make assumptions based on a photo or based on a LinkedIn profile, where you don't have the option to just, or even some of the AI tools that I've seen are even taking things like colleges and companies out of the way, so that you're not instantly, oh, they worked at Google, like I'm going to hire them. And these systems are sort of wonderful tools as they get better to accelerate the process. But I don't see a world where the HR department is replaced by AI. I think that in a lot of ways, what is wrong with corporate HR at this point is the lack of customization, the lack of humanity that's in it. The people are treated like cogs in a machine or numbers on a pipeline, and commoditized. And when we help people negotiate their full-time job offers, which is a service that we provide via 10x Ascend, we see all the time, is this company seeing this person, because it has everything to do with leverage, as a commodity or a unicorn? And that's sort of a whole spectrum. And they might be anywhere on that spectrum. But if they're a commodity, it becomes fairly obvious to us by how they're treated. Whereas when they're a unicorn, it's sort of like, oh, we can breach that band. Oh, we can do anything we want because we see you're special. And that level of customization, of bespokeness, is going to become more and more relevant. The HR person explaining why our equity is more desirable than just saying, this is our equity package. Oh, well, we have a 10-year option period. That's a really desirable thing for a candidate. That's not part of the equation. And HR is not selling their attributes yet. Even though they're desperate to hire, they think the ping pong table or gym or whatever, those perks are, that reputation is going to push people over the line. And they know it, they know stuff is great, but they don't necessarily know how or why it's great. And especially at the startup level, there's so much opportunity for founders and our HR teams to explain why their offering is great.
And guys, we're just about out of time. I got to get in this one last question because I'm curious. We rarely had guests with such a colorful entrepreneurial journey, and you're talking to a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs. So I'd love to hear from both of you. What's your advice to first-time entrepreneurs?
I think it's advice to first-time entrepreneurs, and it's advice to anybody who wants to be great at anything that they do. And that is, you need grit. You need grit and fortitude to really power through the peaks and valleys that come with starting anything and learning something intimately. So that's my number one piece of advice for anybody starting out in anything, entrepreneurship, at a company, wherever it is, grit.
I would probably start there, but since he got that, I'm going to go with intentionality. Mindfulness sounds like a little bit of a woo-woo term, but there is an element of constantly evaluating and prioritizing what is most important for you to be doing. It's easy enough to spin your wheels. I mean, I can tell you, as young entrepreneurs, myself especially more than Rishon, I kept myself busy 24/7 trying to build our first company. And 98% of what I did had nothing to do with our ability to progress. I was busy, I was working hard, but I wasn't discerning what was going to make a difference and what wasn't. So test everything, be really data driven, do the smallest test you can possibly do, iterate, and then keep going. That's what I would say. In addition to grit, grit is number one.
I got this vision or this image of the two of you guys in high school hustling on the mean streets of New York, making fake IDs.
That's a pretty accurate image, actually. That's pretty spot on.
You could have been selling tiddlywinks or iced Eskimos and probably would have had a similar outcome. So it's good. I like the answer. I say hustle, you say grit. I think they're about the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the only distinction I would make between those two words is that when hustling fails, grit is what gets you back to hustling again. Like, you just don't give up. Relentlessness.
Tenacity.
Yeah.
I love it. Good. Well, guys, before I can let you go, I'm sure a lot of people listening would love to know where they can learn more about 10X. You probably got a lot of 10Xers listening to you, and also maybe where can they learn more about the book?
So we have a great book website, gamechangerthebook.com. And one of the cool things we have on the site is a test that you can take to see where you fall on the 10X spectrum. As an individual, you could also take it on behalf of your company based on what you know about the company to see where it falls on the 10X spectrum. Plus, both of our contact information is on the site.
And we're on LinkedIn.
Michael, anything to add there?
We're on social media.
Yeah, our LinkedIns and whatnot are on the book website.
The freelancing business is 10xmanagement.com. The negotiations service business is 10xascend.com. Our entertainment company is brickwallmanagement.com. And I won't go through all of the nonprofits that we've co-founded and gotten involved with because that's too much.
Actually, it's brickwallmgmt.com.
Thank you for the correction.
For Brickwall Management.
Only 25 years into that company that I still don't know the URL.
Guys, I'm going to add one last plug for Musicians on Call. Anything you care to share about that?
It is an amazing organization that brings musicians to the bedsides of patients in healthcare facilities around the country and soon to be around the world.
Truly an inspiration, and maybe that's a topic for a whole separate conversation of some of your philanthropic work.
I'd be thrilled to come back and do that.
Well, guys, that's a wrap for today, but really look forward to continuing the conversation. Really enjoyed it. And everyone listening, go take the test. Rishon, Michael, pleasure having you, and all the best.
Thanks for having us, Dan.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Dan Turchin, your host of AI and the Future of Work, back next week with another fascinating guest.